Hello to my friends at Face to Face Games. This is Travis Simulan Sowers, and I have for you today something a little bit different. We're going to do something different with Crimson Vow than we did with Midnight Hunt for the videos here on Face to Face. If you really enjoyed the gameplay videos, you can still find those at my stream. It's at twitch.tv/Simulan. I also have my own YouTube. If you Google Simulan YouTube, there's plenty of gameplay videos from Midnight Hunt to Crimson Vow to Cube, whatever you want to find. You can find all of that there. So we're going to have some exclusive and I think more valuable content here for Face to Face. What we're going to do here is talk about some of the lessons that I have learned so far from Crimson Vow, some of the card evaluation tricks and gameplay tips that will help you get better at drafting this format on MTG Arena. I'm going to start with, I play best of 3 traditional draft. So some of these tips may carry over into best of 1 and some of them may not. If you'd like a detailed explanation about the differences between best of 1 and best of 3, you can find that in my Joy of Drafting series on my own YouTube channel. So I'm going to start us out with the first big lesson that I got as I was going through and evaluating these cards, and I've seen it play out now that we've had the set out for about a week. And it starts with this theory of way back in the day, there used to be straight up unplayable cards. Like there would just be bad Magic cards in packs. If you talk to somebody who's been drafting for 20 years or more, they'll mention this concept of something called a skill tester. The idea of a skill tester was it was a bad card in the pack and it's testing your skill to know not to take it and play it. And what that led to was a format, or specifically an activity, draft in general, that was just really punishing for anybody that didn't know what they were doing. So if you're a new player and you try to draft 20 years ago, you get a garbage deck full of garbage cards and you get rolled over and you just can't win. So what they've done since then is made some changes. There really aren't any unplayable cards anymore. So the skill is no longer in recognizing a playable card versus an unplayable card. And one trap that I sometimes fall into as a content creator, and I know that other content creators do as well, is looking at a card and saying that it's unplayable. Whereas really what we should be doing, for the most part, I'm talking about commons here. Sure, there's a rare or mythic that was obviously made for EDH, and we're not talking about that card. I'm talking about commons. What I should really be doing is trying to identify the deck that would want each of these cards. And that's what's bringing us to the lesson today, which is this idea that there are secret gold cards, not only in this set, but in every set you've been drafting over roughly the past 5 years, God, maybe even 10. I'm just recognizing it's been about 10 years since M10 came out, and I had a moment where I felt very old. But the idea is the skill lies in recognizing which color pairs of decks want these particular cards, right? You can also look at it as something akin to Cube, where Cube is basically taking a bunch of constructed decks that are very, very powerful, at least the ones we're presented with on Magic Online and Arena, and separating those into packs of boosters that you can draft. There's cards that obviously go together and cards that obviously don't, and then there's a few that fit in anywhere. Lightning Bolt is a great example. Jackal Pup is another great example. So these are 2 very old cards. Lightning Bolt was red, deal 3 damage to target creature, player, planeswalker, whatever you want. That just goes in any red deck. Whereas Jackal Pup, and I'm remembering old cards because I'm old. It was a 1-mana 2/1 that took damage when it was dealt damage. Like you take damage when it takes damage. Doesn't matter. It's a very aggressive 1-drop. That card really only goes in an aggro deck. That same type of thinking that, okay, I'm playing an aggro deck, so I would want a Jackal Pup, or I'm playing a red deck, so I'll take the Lightning Bolt. Even though most red decks are going to be aggressive, that same type of thinking will help you in this set. Let's go through a couple examples, and I think you'll begin to see what I mean. I think a lot of people are already on the train that Fierce Retribution is a very good common, right? So this is destroy target attacking creature, or 6 mana, destroy any creature. You can kind of just put this in a white deck, and it's going to perform for you. It doesn't matter what type of white deck. Just any of them are going to be pretty happy with this one. So this is a little bit higher pick than some of the cards we're going to start talking about next. I've heard a lot of people say that Traveling Minister might be the best white common. And I think that's a bit of a hot take mentality, a bit of too much best of one-ism, and also a bit of personal bias. Now, all of that said, this card is fine, and there's decks that it absolutely shines in. I think this card is an Abzan card. And I'm going to talk to you about another concept that I bumped into with my friend Dave Seville. Those of you that have been fans of Fossifos for a long time will remember him from the Men from Moto and Arena Athletes podcast that we did together. Dave said when you design a good cube, there's mechanics that go across color pairs and into wedges and shards. And he's like, so if I have counters as a theme for Abzan, you should see a little bit of it in black-white and a little bit of it in white-green and a little of it in black-green and be able to make it work within all of those. And I think the Traveling Minister is a really good example of a card that really fits into a wedge. A lot of the people that have been having a great deal of success with it have likely been playing it with black-white or green-white. In a black-white deck, this is giving you a repeatable trigger of life gain, which makes sure that your bats are always going to be Gravediggers, and you're always drawing cards off of your Markov Herpaderps, the uncommon that lets you draw cards. That deck just wants repeatable ways to gain life. So I believe that Traveling Minister is at its best in black-white. I believe it's also quite playable when we get into green-white, as that deck is typically all about training. So you do want to build up the power of one particular creature so that you can train all of your other creatures with it. That deck typically also wants to be very aggressive, so it has room for 1-drops. So I think it's playable there as well. I think you can put it in a blue-white deck with the idea that you're going to pump the power of a flyer and then make it a little harder for someone to race you. And you can put it in a red-white deck with the idea that it's a 1-drop that could do some attacking for you, but it doesn't really shine in those decks. And I think a card like this is the real skill tester of modern Magic, right? Like, the power level of commons, once you get past something like Fierce Retribution, which is just good in any deck, begins to shrink down to where do you want this? And that's really what you have to be asking yourself. I think there's a few other examples of secret gold cards and a few examples of cards that are generally not great, but I want to go through and show you a couple more as we're kind of going through this. Sigarda's Imprisonment is generally going to be good in just about any white deck that you put it in. There's a lot of people saying that pacifism is bad in this set because of exploiting, but if I'm being killed by a 5/5 flyer and they exploit that instead of the Doom Dissenter they had laying around, I'm pretty happy about that exchange. So don't undervalue the common removal, especially in this set, but we'll be talking about that in a future lesson. I think the Heron of Hope is another really good example of a gold card. This is at its best in black-white. Its stat line is such that you can put this in any white deck, and it's going to be pretty dang good for you, but mostly black-white decks are going to be very interested in the life gain that's happening here, because again, it triggers that repeatable life gain effect. And as you look through here, I think you can identify some of the other cards that predominantly go in one type of deck. And then there's a few that are just good anywhere, like the Drogskull Infantry. So I think they move up to higher picks. I think we can make the argument that the Lantern Bearer is actually pretty good in any blue deck if you start thinking about it. Like, blue-white is obviously very interested in having enchantments trigger. It's very interested in poking and damage in the air, and this is doing both of those things there. Blue-red is interested in forcing through chunks of damage, and this can do that there. It's also interested in casting non-creature spells. Typically in blue-red sets in the past, we've seen them want to see you cast instants and sorceries. In this set, they trigger off of non-creatures, which Lantern's Lift is. Blue-black is interested in exploiting creatures, and this is a creature that we can exploit and then get value from. And blue-green is interested in self-mill. So if you mill this and then cast it on a big green chonker, all of a sudden you win in that game. So the Lantern Bearer is an example of a card that can just slot effortlessly into any of the various decks that you're playing. If we compare that to some of the other cards, you'll see cards that begin to get a bit more narrow. Something like the Wonderlight Spirit doesn't exactly have a great home. This card is fine as long as you're wanting to chonk in damage, and if it was a 3/2, I think we'd be pretty excited about it. But this is more of a level of filler card that I think is really only exciting in blue-white. And even then, you're probably looking to wield them much later. Because blue-white would be happy to be putting more auras on this, would be the reason. Blue-green can sometimes do that as well. There's almost like a blue-green Boggles deck. As we dig through here, I think the Stitched Assistant is pretty unexciting unless you're exploiting something for it. So this is an example of a card that kind of fits into a wedge. I was not typically playing this much in blue-white or in blue-red, but in blue-green, where I might have some insect tokens left over, or in blue-black, where I've got a much deeper exploit theme, we can find a home for a card like this. So I think just taking the time to look at these cards and think about where do they really want to be, right? Like I've played against some opponents who were playing Persistent Specimen in a red-black deck, and you can do that. It's fine. It's a fine card, but it wasn't really doing much for them there. Whereas if you put this into a deck that's much heavier on exploit, or a deck that's milling itself, like a black-green deck that has some exploit shenanigans, all of a sudden this can become a much more powerful common. So I think that's really the key lesson I want you to take away from today is rather than me just tell you what the gold cards are, try to look through some of the cards in this set and say, what is a card that's just good and you would take it and play it kind of no matter what's happening? And what's a card that might be an example of a bit more of a gold card that you really only want in one specific deck? Interestingly, there's a lot of just really good cards in red. And I don't understand why red-green is getting a lot of hate from some of the talking heads these days. But I mean, it is what it is. Yeah, I was trying to look at a red card that's just not particularly good. And I think all of them have their place. Obviously, you need to be very aggressive if you're going to play something like this, and you'd want to wheel it incredibly late. And this is worse than the one we had in the last set. But like I said, your homework from here is to go through and look at the commons and some of the uncommons and ask yourself, is this a gold card? Because if it is, you shouldn't be picking it quite as highly as some of the cards that are just going to be good, solid, no matter where you end up. What I'm arguing here is that a card like Drogskull Infantry is probably a better early pick than Traveling Minister until you know that you're in white-black or white-green. Once you've established that, you can start considering taking these a little higher. So that's your lesson for today. I need your feedback in the comments. I need to know if you like the new format, if you like the lessons, and what other lessons you would like to learn. I definitely want to have a chat next week about when and how to use removal in the set, because I think that is vital to your leveling up and being able to perform well in Innistrad Crimson Vow. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Face to Face Games for the support. I'll see you next time.